Genesis chapter 30, verse 1. Now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she became jealous of her sister, and she said to Jacob, "Give me children, or else I die." We've got a drama queen here. Verse 2. Then Jacob's anger burned against Rachel, and he said, "Am I in the place of God, who has withheld you from the fruit of the womb?" She said, "Here is my maid Bilhah. Go into her, that she may bear on my knees, that through her I too may have children." Oh boy, here we go again. Verse 4. So she gave him her maid Bilhah as a wife, and Jacob went into her. Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Verse 6. Then Rachel said, "God has vindicated me, and has indeed heard my voice, and has given me a son." Therefore she named him Dan, which means judgment. Verse 7. Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. So Rachel said, "With mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and I have indeed prevailed." And she is named Naphtali, which means my wrestling, my struggle, or my strife. And this just goes to show how the sin involved in the system of bigamy itself, or having multiple wives, was a violation of God's ordinance, seen in Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. As discussed previously, the Old Testament patriarchs that made this decision ultimately went against God, and the result was always struggle and difficulty. God allowed them to make choices and granted them the freedom to live out their desires, which they all would stumble and find out they could not yield true happiness. Eventually, we see rules put into place on incestuous and polygamous relationships in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. But for a time, and likely to allow the earth to populate, God allowed mankind to struggle with their marriage choices. All right, verse 9. When Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, she took her maid Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. I'm telling you, this would make some great reality TV. Verse 10. Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, "How fortunate." So she named him Gad, which means fortune or luck. Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. Verse 13. Then Leah said, "Happy am I, for women will call me happy." So she named him Asher, which means happy, fortunate, or blessed. Verse 14. Now in the days of wheat harvest, Reuben, who was Leah's firstborn son with Jacob, went and found mandrakes in the field. And a mandrake is a plant with white or purple flowers and large yellow berries, with a forked fleshly root that supposedly resembles the human form and has a history of being used in medicine or for magic. And he brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, "Is it a small matter for you to take my husband? And would you take my son's mandrakes also?" All right, go get the popcorn. This is getting good. Okay, so the desperate bargain by Rachel was an attempt to become pregnant with the aid of the mandrakes, a folk remedy which failed to understand that God's the one who gives the children. All right, so Rachel said, "Therefore he may lie with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes." Verse 16. When Jacob came in from the field in the evening, then Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come in to me, for I have surely hired you with my son's mandrakes." So he lay with her that night. Verse 17. God gave heed to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. Then Leah said, "God has given me my wages because I have gave my maid to my husband." So she named him Issachar, which means reward. Verse 19. Leah conceived again and bore a sixth son to Jacob. Then Leah said, "God has endowed me with a good gift. Now my husband will dwell with me, because I have borne him 6 sons. So she named him Zebulun, which means dwelling, signifying her hope of Jacob's dwelling with her. Leah was one desperate housewife, I tell you. I feel for her. Must have been rough knowing that your husband was in love with your sister. I get it. Verse 21. Afterwards she bore a daughter and named her Dinah, which means avenged or vindicated. Then God remembered or recognized Rachel, and God gave heed to her and opened her womb. And it's not that God forgot her. He had a plan all along, which again had to do with testing Jacob and Rachel's faith, which they failed miserably at. And as a result, their requests were delayed. Verse 23. So she conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. She named him Joseph, saying, May the Lord give me another son. Joseph was Rachel's firstborn, blood-born child from her own womb, and the name Joseph means, May the Lord add or increase. Verse 25. Now it came about when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, Send me away, that I may go to my own place and to my own country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me depart. For you yourself know my service which I have rendered you. Let me have my own life, man. So 14 years of absence had not dulled Jacob's awareness of belonging to the land which God had given to him. Since Mesopotamia was not his home and his contract with Laban was up, he desired to return to Canaan. Verse 27. But Laban said to him, If now it pleases you, stay with me. I have divined that the Lord has blessed me on your account, meaning that he learned by divination that God had blessed him on account of Jacob. Verse 28. He continued, Name your wages and I will give it. But he said to him, You yourself know how I have served you and how your cattle have fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased to a multitude. And the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned. But now, when shall I provide for my own household also? So he said, What shall I give you? And Jacob said, You shall not give me anything. If you will do this one thing for me, I will again pasture and keep your flock. Verse 32. Let me pass through your entire flock today, removing from there every speckled and spotted sheep, and every black one among the lambs, and the spotted and the speckled among the goats, and such shall be my wages. So my honesty will answer for me later when you come concerning my wages. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and black among the lambs, if found with me, will be considered stolen. Laban said, Good, let it be according to your word. So he removed on that day the striped and spotted male goats and all speckled and spotted female goats, every one with white in it, and all the black ones among the sheep, and gave them into the care of his sons. Verse 36, And he put a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. So Jacob wanted nothing except to be in a position for God to bless him. He was willing to stay, but not be further indebted to the schemes of Laban. He'd had enough. He offered Laban a plan that could bless him while costing Laban nothing. He would continue to care for Laban's animals as he had been doing. His pay would consist of animals not yet born, animals which would seem to be the less desirable to Laban because of their markings and color. None of the solid-colored animals would be taken by Jacob, and if any were born into Jacob's flocks, Laban could take them. Only the animals born speckled, spotted, striped, or abnormally colored would belong to Jacob. Evidently, most of the animals were white sheep, black goats, and brown cattle. Jacob's offer would sort the speckled or abnormally colored animals to breed more like them. He would separate them into a flock of their own kind, apart from the normally colored animals. Only the spotted and abnormally colored offspring born in the future to the normally colored would be his. Apparently, Laban believed this to be a small price to pay on his portion to maintain the skills of Jacob and favor from God. Verse 37. Then Jacob took fresh rods of poplar and almond and plane trees and peeled white stripes in them, exposing the white which was in the rods. He set the rods which he had peeled in front of the flocks in the gutters, even in the watering troughs, where the flocks came to drink, and they mated when they came to drink. So the flocks mated by the rods, and the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. Jacob separated the lambs and made the flocks face toward the striped and all the black in the flock of Laban. And he put his own herds apart, and did not put them with Laban's flock. Moreover, whenever the stronger of the flock were mating, Jacob would place the rods in the side of the flock in the gutters, so that they might mate by the rods. But when the flock was feeble or lacking strength, he did not put them in. So the feebler were Laban's, and the stronger were Jacob's. So the man became exceedingly prosperous, and had large flocks, and female and male servants, and camels and donkeys. So Jacob knew that when an uncommon marked animal was born with the recessive gene, He could then begin to breed that gene selectively to produce flocks and herds of abnormally marked animals, which were in no way inferior physically to the normally marked ones. Once he began this breeding process, he learned that when the bark was peeled off from the poplar, almond, and plane trees, there was some stimulant released into the water that stimulated the animal's mating activity. His plan was successful and kept his own flock separate from the abnormally colored ones of Laban. Okay, so that's it for today. Hope to see you tomorrow. God bless you.